All right. So, yeah, we're recording, so we got to keep the language good now.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. So, obviously I'm like my students call me Dr. Soar or Soar. I do have a first name, but literally only the telemarketers call me by it. So, how about you? What's your name?
Yeah, definitely. My name's Sean Gregory. I'm a senior at Wilton High School in Wilton, Connecticut.
Sweet, brother. Yo, how'd we end up meeting up, like you and me? I can tell you my end of it, but you can tell me yours.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm I've done a variety, I guess, of environmental work. It really started my sophomore year where I started researching PFAS actually at Yale, the effects of PFAS on mature stem cells. But I did some stuff, met some people, and then I was eventually appointed to this newly forming Connecticut Climate Education Hub.
Mm-hmm.
Forget the name for a sec. And
No
so the goal of
worries.
the Climate Education Hub kind of links to something I'm trying to do, which is institute or increase the amount of climate education and climate justice education within Connecticut's school curriculum, specifically, I think, secondary education. So I went to a few meetings there and I met some people, and then I was referred to you, Dr. Soar, into your class to kind of help out, possibly teach a lesson, which I guess is what we're doing now. And yeah, just kind of increase climate education on PFAS, something I know a little bit about that way.
Sweet. Yeah, Sean, I got like an email from like my boss, like one of because I got a few bosses. But Julie Christensen, she'll say that she's not my boss, but like anytime I ever need anything, I go to her and I'm like, hey, Julie, I could really use this, and it involves money, and she usually makes it happen. So, she's a boss like that. But
Yeah,
she's like, hey,
definitely.
look, I met this guy, email. I think you two had hit it off, and like, just back and forth chat. You even got to talk to me and my father when we were driving off to Vermont, and gonna go do some stuff up there. And yeah, so it was like, oh, PFASs, that'd be good. A lot of my students like are interested in the environment, and I think a lot of stuff that you bring up is because, like, look, I'm on the way out, like I'm the midway point. You guys, like, the reason why it's so important for environmental education because you guys are the next wave coming in. And even with Biden's like infrastructure bill, it's like looking at opportunities with environmentalism and just the world that we're working in. So yeah, that's
Yeah, definitely.
you know. Um, so we got about like, how you are, how we met. Uh, what's your passion? How'd you end up like looking up or hooking up with PFAS or just learning about it?
Yeah, so the reason I first started investigating PFAS is kind of there's nothing really special. I was just looking on the news one day trying to think of a research project for my internship at Yale, and I saw PFAS, and I saw that these chemicals were really emerging in the field as industrial chemicals that people thought had some malicious health effects, but no one really knew the specificity of it. And
Yeah.
so I researched the effects of PFAS, like I mentioned, on stem cells, because the lab I was working at used the model organisms of planarians, which are these types of flatworms that have really potent regenerative capacities. They have these things called neoblasts that essentially
Okay.
function as stem cells within humans. So I was affecting, or no, I was investigating the effects of PFAS on changing stem cell pluripotency, integrity, and differentiation. Basically, how a body can respond, repair, and kind of develop in spite of chemical influence. So
All
that's
right.
why I got involved with PFAS. Yeah.
Let me see if I can summarize a little bit, just because, like, so you got into PFAS because you saw it on like television. You're like, okay, and it looked like they had some like PFAS. You're like, okay, it has some bad effect for humanity with health. And then you're like, okay, let's test this out. And we got some flatworms, which grow pretty quick. Well, are pretty simple organisms, but like they basically can grow. They're pretty healthy. They're adaptable. And you're like, hey, let's hit them with the PFAS and see what happens. And you're like, hey, yeah, bad stuff happened, right?
Yeah, pretty
Okay.
much.
All
And
right.
I think one thing, so yeah, that's how I started doing my research, started investigating PFAS. But then after I got my results back, I also kind of realized there was a social justice problem with PFAS as well, because PFAS are industrial chemicals that are found predominantly in industrialized areas. And societally, those areas also happen to be, largely BIPOC and lower income communities. So I was seeing, hey, here's a chemical that has been known to cause harmful health effects. So that's environmental and public health related. But also these chemicals are disproportionately located in, underserved and lower income communities. And that's
Yeah.
kind of that social justice issue. And that's what I'm really interested in pursuing in college and also as a career.
You got quite a bit of spots you can go with it. And like my students will agree with you. I mean, it's kind of sad, but we kind of realize that if you look through history, poor people are the ones that usually get screwed,
Yeah,
no other really way to put it. And environmentally, it's no different. It's a lot easier to shove junk down somebody's throat when they don't have bigger pockets and they can't hire the big attorneys for it. So,
right.
and a lot of that can be in the urban areas. So, good stuff. All right. Yeah, let's take us into some slides just because like me and you talking, we could be here all night and like that for which is great for like 20% of my clientele because they're auditory learners, but visual works out well for people. So
For
let's,
sure.
let's
Let
see
me
what we
open.
got. It should be a center screen at the bottom. There should be a link for share screen.
Okay, sounds good. I'll just open up the slideshow really quickly. And then I can jump in.
Yeah, no worries.
Share screen. Ooh, I have a lot of tabs open, so sorry for that.
Don't worry about it. If you had like a clean desk, they say you're not doing any work. So it's the same thing for like, you know, actually, I got some students that might beat you on that one. They want tabs. They're like, I got more tabs open on my cell phone, you know? So yeah, it's all good.
Well, can you see my screen in the presentation?
I can. And if I look up, the reason why is because I'm working on like multiple monitors here. So I've got like a big monitor here. So if I'm looking up like this and you see the inside of my nose, that's why.
How good.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so this is my presentation, or this is a presentation I kind of came up with. So PFAS, the hidden dangers, my name's Sean, and then the Sierra Club. So I'm on the executive committee of Connecticut Sierra Club, which is the largest and oldest environmental nonprofit within the United States. And so, as part of my role, I guess, I'm leading an anti PFAS legislative roadshow and webinar series to kind of educate people on PFAS because I don't think they get the attention they deserve. So that's why
Also, I'm going to give you a little bit of attention too. If you're on the executive branch in the Sierra Club and you're in high school, that speaks pretty highly of you.
thank
Um,
you.
Anytime. I also a shameless plug too. I do know three people that did meet on the Sierra Club outings and ended up getting married. So I'm just telling people, my students are like, hey, in college, if you're a little lonely and just, you know, magic
That's amazing.
happens.
Yes,
So,
sir.
all
All right.
right, fire away for us.
Cool. Yeah. So, brief introduction of PFAS. So, I was like starting with the chemistry because I think it all kind of derives there. So,
Yeah,
PFAS are the full name are perfluoroalkyl acids. Probably pronounced that wrong.
I
But what
do
that
all the
essentially
time. Don't worry.
so what that essentially means is that you have a carbon backbone, like you see in this picture over here, and a bunch
Mhm.
of fluorine atoms around it.
Okay.
So, like you see, there's a bunch of carbons, fluorine atoms, and then usually there's an alkyl group. Here it's oxygen, hydrogen,
Hmm.
and those kind of result in the different chemicals. But the very basic structure is a carbon backbone with a bunch of different fluorine attached to it. And so PFAS is an extremely broad term for an extremely broad chemical group. The EPA lists that there's at least officially recognized 14,735 compounds. PubMed, a leading scientific literature database, estimates that there's 6 million. So, there's a lot of chemicals produced in a lot of industrial practices. So, the carbon fluorine bond, like I mentioned, between this carbon backbone and this fluorine is one of the strongest naturally occurring chemical bonds that can be found in nature. And the result of that is that these chemicals resist the biodegradation. they bioaccumulate, meaning they build up in living organisms and within the human body, and that they can induce toxic health effects within your lungs, liver, heart, all over the body, really. And so the, you'll sometimes hear PFAS referred to as forever chemicals,
Yep.
and they get that term because this really strong carbon fluorine bond doesn't break down in the natural environment. And so these chemicals can stay in your body, can stay in the environment, can stay in waterways for decades, meaning that when you initially release these chemicals, there's no going back without millions of dollars in remediation spent, which I'll get
Mhm.
to later.
Yeah, before we go too far, too, I mean, I'm looking at these just with how you have a carbon backbone, like you said, but then basically surrounded yourself with fluorine. And it's pretty good insulator because there's like nothing that can really get in to really break those bonds. That I can see very well. I mean, almost have to break something in the keel like area over here with those bonds, and that's highly specific. So I can see where it's like tough to biodegrade. It's pretty well insulated and just to resist that. Um, Bioaccumulation too, where it starts getting into our waterways and then accumulates in the food animals we eat, and then like top predators and whatnot, you're going to start a bioaccumulating more and more. Um, and obviously, I mean, I'm looking to live about 80. All right. Some of my students are probably going to be pushing 95. That's a whole lot of time for this stuff to bioaccumulate. So,
Exactly.
yeah. All right.
Yeah. So this kind of continues. What are the main sources of PFAS in the environment? So, like I mentioned, PFAS, because of that really strong carbon fluorine bond, they're also used in a ton of industrial practices because they can resist heat. It's a water repellent, which I'll get to later, stuff like that. So, one major source of PFAS in the environment is through firefighting foam from in military bases, airports, fire stations, refineries, stuff like that. And that's really special. I mean, there's a really big case of PFAS and firefighting foam within Connecticut, which I think I'll get to later as well. So that's one source. They're also used in a ton of industrial sites, paper packaging, food packaging, leather, plastics, metal plating. Really think of a lot of industrial practices, and PFAS are used in them. And then finally, like I mentioned, because of bioaccumulation and because they're found kind of everywhere, they eventually build up in landfills and biosolids, and that's a source of PFAS in the naturally occurring environment as well.
So I'm gonna throw some stuff too, like at you just for fun and like whatnot. So when I go off to Vermont, I'm usually off in central Vermont. My grandparents got into an area that's by a ski resort, Killington, when it was going up 1950s, 60s. Anyway, like so what they did was you have to worry about fluorocarbons like from ski wax back and when snow melts going into the water. But also, too, what they did because they thought it would be fun is they would run a race at the end of the season, like in April, May, up this one road, the access road, and then they'd have leftover foam from fire that they'd have to let go because it was like in fire extinguishers and stuff and trucks. So they thought, hey, this is a great idea. We can get rid of the foam by just spraying it on the runner's feet, and they could run through foam, and it'd be so great, right? And the problem is the PFAS got into the drinking water, into the water table. Yeah, you want to see some nasty stuff? Well, I'll go to share screen for 1 second. I'll share my screen, which is going to be, I think it's this one here. Um, yeah, I think I'm sharing it now. All right. Um, yeah, Google Chrome, Killington. Just if you, some of these sites here just say it, state confirms 3 public water systems have PFAS. Vermont communities search for PFAS solution as water remains. Killington Resort Area initialized site investigation. All right, toxic firefighting foam complicates Vermont effort. All right. So, I mean, just all of these, man, we could have some fun with. Now I have to figure out how to undo this on with my computer, though. All right, let's see if I can undo. Oh, wait, did I hit share for this? I don't think I did.
Yeah, it couldn't pop up, but
Oh,
oh, there.
okay.
Yeah, I see it now.
Yeah, now we see it. So, like, sorry, I was talking to myself
Oh,
there.
good. Now I'm reading it. That's crazy.
Yeah, I'll try sending you this information, Sean, too. But
Yeah,
basically, you
for
can
sure.
even see it here. toxic firefighting foam complicates Vermont effort. Yeah, it's because it was, expiring. So they sprayed it at people's feet. Then they washed it down the road, which got into the drinking table, which a lot of the people in that area get their water from drinking wells. So, um, as I'm like fond of saying, it's like the water there, it's more toxic than your ex on social media. It's pretty toxic. So, um, yeah. So anyway, that's what like. So when I saw the picture of like the guy spraying the fire foam, I'm like, oh yeah, I know that.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Yeah. All right, let's talk. Yeah, let's continue on here.
See if it's gonna work. Computer very slow.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So yeah, so like you mentioned, there's a ton of different sources of PFAS in the environment, and that kind of gets into people in a variety of ways. It contaminates drinking water, like you just mentioned. It also contaminates food because when you eat different organisms, such
Mm-hmm.
as fish, stuff like that, it builds up in there. Textiles, because PFAS are used to be water resistant and other kind of industrial boons like that. And so when you're eventually wearing these textiles, you have the potential to inhale or ingest PFAS and it enters your body that way. Finally, food packaging, same logic. You see a popcorn bag, that PFAS can be used to coat that. And then when you eat the popcorn, PFAS enter your body that way.
Oh, okay. Got it. So it's not just like drink water from like contaminated water. Do we test for it in Connecticut? Do you know? I know it's a straight up just question we didn't talk about,
Yeah,
but
I don't. So it's not mandated right now. I don't think CT. I think there's some basic guideline levels, like basic
Mhm.
PFAS guidelines, but current testing is pretty lacking. So I'm working with a few people, like Connecticut Clean Water Action, people like that, to kind of create our own tests, or not create our own tests, but use our own tests to run our own kind of survey of major waterways and kind of figure out PFAS results that way. So in short, not really, but kind of.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And as far as textiles go too, that's not just like, okay, a waterproof jacket, umbrella, shoes, but like I'm thinking it's like anything you get rid of too, because you get rid of it, I don't know what PFAS does when you combust it, like with burning. But if you're putting it in a landfill, you know,
Exactly.
yep, still gonna be around. And popcorn, that's a bummer because like I gotta tell you, a ton of our students eat microwave popcorn. God, I've
Yeah.
been guilty of it myself. So, yep. Okay, got it.
So, like I mentioned, they're pretty much ubiquitous, and there's very weak federal laws on it. So, the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, has released no national enforceable drinking water standard. They've re- released health advisories for four chemicals: PFOA, PFOS, Gen X, and PFBS. These four chemicals are parts of the PFAS group, but they don't have a very strict enforceable limit that can be used to hold state governments, polluting corporations, stuff like that accountable. And there's no national regulation of PFAS to air, wastewater, or directly to rivers and streams, no regulation to waste disposal, and there's very weak rules on reporting these industrial pollutants or on reporting these industrial releases. So as a result, there's really there's no major federal action on the PFAS level, on the PFAS scheme. And so the FDA, so that's all EPA. There's also three other governmental organizations I talked about. So there's the FDA, which
Hmm.
deals with food packaging and medicines. There's the CPSC, which is product safety. Kind of forget what CPSC stands for, but it has to do with consumer purchases. And then the Department of Defense, which their main action was to phase out PFAS and firefighting foam, but really that's the extent of it. So the summing up this slide basically means federal laws aren't really doing anything to kind of address the problem.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, it's actually kind of scary to me because I mean it's like wild, wild west all over again. It's like no rules, just no regulation. And that could go rather bad if we're looking to see where PFAS is going.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
got it.
And this, like you mentioned, is where PFAS are going. So this is an infographic of two different states. We have Michigan and New York State.
Yep.
And so PFAS are extremely big problems in both of these states. So if you look at the different infographics while I'm talking, I suppose there's a variety of different, each region is paying different amounts with PFAS restoration costs. But Michigan, as a state in 2021, paid at least $139 million to clean up PFAS. And New York State is paying, as of 2022, $752 million. So like I mentioned, these chemicals are not easy to get rid of. And the second they actually start contaminating water resources, food resources, you have to pay millions of dollars to get rid of them. And that's a pretty big problem.
Yep. I'm looking too at we have a teacher at our school that grew up in Flint, Michigan. And so, Flint, Michigan's knows about bad water pretty well.
Yep.
Um, so I was looking to see in that area whereabouts, but like also too, I'm looking to see whereabouts these dollar signs are. And just I'm gonna tell you Johnson City right here in New York State is a really rough area. I mean, it doesn't look it, but it's the sort of place you get your car window could be broken into just for the change in your cup holder. All right. So when we're talking about areas that are affected, it hits everywhere, but it seems to hit areas that are a little bit more low income. So
Exactly. And that's
yeah,
the social justice issue with the problem.
yeah, big time. This is one state over from us. So if it's hitting New York, it's hitting Connecticut.
Yes, exactly. And I believe, well, this next side kind of relates to it. Yeah. So, oh, oops, there we go. Yeah. So, why the urgency? So, that was a snapshot of Michigan and New York State, but this is a problem that's affecting people nationwide, even worldwide. So, there's thousands of impacted water systems serving millions of people across the state. And I think, I forget the statistic, I put it in the sign on petition I had, but I think the National Geographic Survey, some national survey estimated that they predict at least 45% of people are can be susceptible to PFAS in their drinking water. So these are pretty big problems, and this problem is happening nationwide. And there's thousands of industrial release sites, from landfills to wastewater treatment plants to big industrial facilities and corporations. And so each dot here represents suspected industrial discharges of PFAS or different locations of PFAS, pollution. And so as you notice, there's dots all over the country, but they're also heavily concentrated down super industrialized areas, like, along the East Coast. It's kind of cut off, but along the East Coast and areas like that. So it's a pretty big problem, and it's happening everywhere.
Question for you. When did we really start using PFASs? Like, I'm just thinking the history a little bit. Do we know?
Yeah, so I'm unsure exactly. I'm trying to think.
Yeah,
So
no worries.
if
It's just approximate.
I'll get if I had to guess, I would guess kind of the second half of the 1900s was when they were kind
Mhm.
of fully coming into fruition. I know there was a conference called the Stockholm Conference or the Stockholm Convention in
Yeah.
2001 that was supposed to ban the use of PFAS in a lot of different ways. So I would say kind of around give or take 50 years before then was really the peak of its usage. And
Mhm.
from there, it's kind of gradually stayed the same, maybe declined a little bit, but they're obviously still a really big problem.
I'm just thinking a little bit of industrial too, because here in New England, a lot of our small cities and towns have got a history of industrialization, and we could be the early users. So unfortunately, like 50 years later, we're the ones paying the price. Like, hey, look, I'm looking out there, and I'm not picking on Wyoming, but like they don't have the industrial base that say, a Lowell, Massachusetts does, that Willimantic in Connecticut does, that Manchester does. When Manchester is making the parachutes for the Army in World War II, some other stuff. So
Yeah,
They don't have the
exactly.
industrial might that we kind of have in New England. So,
Exactly. So, like you mentioned, it's mainly located in major industrial areas. And this kind of relates to this, that PFAS represent traditional socioeconomic inequities, that PFAS are used near refineries, chemical plants, and other historic industry sites that, again, happen to usually be lower income and BIPOC communities, and that they're used in military bases, landfills, incinerators, deep well injection sites, again, predominantly located in lower income and BIPOC industrial communities. And
mm-hmm.
here, different ways we get rid of PFAS, none of them work. So, oh, kind of an infographic, but yes, we try burning PFAS-based industrial firefighting foams. We try washing them down the drains by dumping them into water. We try to concentrate them into sludge and spread them on farmlands and home gardens, which is a very big problem in Maine now. But essentially, the moral of the infographic is that we try to get rid of PFAS in a lot of ways, but it's it's very expensive and it's pretty inefficient. So the best way of getting rid of PFAS is to not use them in the first place.
Yeah, got it with that. Like I'm just thinking like incinerating them. Go ahead, try to incinerate something that was meant to stop a fire.
Exactly.
I mean, I can think of like dumber ways to like spend my energy, just not off the top of my head. So, I mean, that's just not going to get you too far. And as far as like putting it on, farmers' fields, I don't see really how that's going to help you out versus, yeah,
Yeah,
got it.
sure. So this is another infographic of PFAS and wastewater treatment. So PFAS start in wastewater, and then they go on to contaminate water. They can go on to contaminate landfills, which eventually come back to water. They can go to contaminate soil, which eventually reaches the water and the crops, incinerators, landfills, water, soil. So essentially, it's kind of a self-completing cycle. And that once PFAS are released in wastewater treatment or just released in general, it cycles through different aspects of the environment and of human industry, and it's extremely hard to get rid of.
Got it. My Zoom meeting just told me I got about 10 minutes. I guess Correcto no longer like goes for the Buku plan post COVID.
That's good.
So we got about 10 minutes left, brother.
All right, sounds good. So now I'm shifting into the kind of the policy side. So these are different states that have adopted some form of PFAS policy. And you'll note a lot of them are in New England, a lot of them are on the West Coast, not too many in the middle. But a lot of the states that have adopted a PFAS policy are the ones that are predominantly hit by it.
I
So
was gonna say, I'm
Connecticut is one
surprised
of
that Florida's doing it. I mean, Florida doesn't usually go that way as much. Um, but then again, they have a lot to lose from it. So,
exactly. So here's a more in-depth description of state action on PFAS. This might be, I don't think this is outdated, but this is kind of a very over brief introduction into PFAS policy. So
mhm.
Maine and Minnesota have passed very broad bans on PFAS containing products to phase out the chemicals, essentially saying, here's a huge list of PFAS containing products. Let's get rid of that. Maine also requires industrial corporations to disclose to the general public all uses of PFAS to kind of, show people, yeah, these these corporations are using these chemicals. 12
Mhm.
states have phased out PFAS in food packaging, Connecticut being one of them. 6 states have adopted restrictions on PFAS in these textiles, carpets, rugs, aftermarket treatments. And then 11 states have banned the sale of firefighting foams with PFAS. Again, Connecticut is one of them. So snapshot
Mhm.
there. So yeah, now back to Connecticut. So here are 4 snapshots of news articles with PFAS. So more Connecticut towns are finding PFAS in the water supplies. Resident power research reveals PFAS drinking water in Connecticut towns. CT officials are about to inspect 2,400 sites for PFAS chemicals. Consumption advisory with PFAS regarding fish from 11 rivers tightened. Moral of the story is Connecticut is affected by PFAS.
Yep.
And here's an infographic that shows that. So on the right side is all the verified points of PFAS contamination. And you'll notice that there's a lot less dots than the left side, which is suspected contamination. So this kind of goes with what you were talking about, Dr. Sword, in that there isn't a lot of real testing to kind of get to the root of the issue. So there's a very big discrepancy on verified versus suspected sites, making PFAS so much of an issue. One, because of their magnitude, but two, because people aren't really sure where they are or aren't sure how big of a problem they are within the state.
Yep. I could see it too as you start following the sea line and then you're going straight up Connecticut River Valley,
Yeah,
just urbanization. Look, Hartford's getting slammed, New Haven's getting slammed, Bridgeport, Stamford, so social equity. Oh yeah, kind of right there. So
and then that's the end of my presentation. Usually, this has kind of Ann Hulick. She's the director of Connecticut Clean Water Action. She also presents from the slideshow, but I'll stop the screen share. Yeah, but basically, moral of the story is that PFAS are a very big environmental issue, but also a very big social justice issue. And it's one that's going to directly affect Connecticut and the United States for years to come. So the best way to stop PFAS from being a problem is to prevent the use of them kind of now. Stop them at the source.
yeah, the best thing is to like, as my grandfather always said, he was a recovering alcoholic. Actually, it's the step grandfather. Got a weird family, but he said, he was an Irishman in Holyoke, Massachusetts, which was an area that would get hit by this. He goes, "Hi there, Jimmy." I had never, best way to never, best way to quit is to never start. So,
Exactly.
so, especially when you look at like high school education, freshman year is always the hardest. And then as you start getting off towards like junior, senior, you know how things go, you know how the game's played, and you start getting really good grades. So I could see it too with PFAS as being like, you tell you what, nip it right in the bud, don't start using them. Um, Maybe a question I could ask like some people, we'll see if my students are still, with it, but like, all right, questions I would be asking is why do people use PFASs? You know, um, maybe what are some ways to some other materials we can use besides PFAS? You did covered it pretty good as far as mitigation with the cost, basically expensive,
Yeah.
you know. Um, these are different questions that we could be putting out there. All right. Is there a way that we can like subsidize to help people stop using PFASs?
Right.
Um, is there a tax we can build in to kind of like hit it on up to kind of like hold people accountable to it, and also fines too, that kind of help fuel, for lack of better terms, like the testing and whatnot.
Right.
So um just to hold companies accountable a little bit. So we're doing the right thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, brother, I'm pretty happy with this presentation. You explained it pretty good. So
Thank you. Thank you for
anytime,
having me.
dude, anytime. I'm gonna hit the stop recording button here, so I think we're good for that for the night.
All right.